Hello everybody, welcome back to another Pandora Hearts discussion video. This is it, guys. It's the end, volume number 24. Of course there's going to be spoilers, but at this point in the game you guys already know that. And there's nothing to read ahead because this is the end. So I've decided that with this video, I'm not going to do like a really strict play-by-play of this happened and this happened. What I did actually today was I sat down and I read the manga again, this volume, and I kind of typed out a whole bunch of stuff, like notes and thoughts and ideas as I went along, because this was a pretty big volume, and of course lots happened in it, lots of action and everything else, but I think I really want to sort of get to the ideas that the book talked about. So if you see me referencing or holding an iPad, it's because I actually included, I had 3 pages of typed notes by the time all was said and done. So let's just get into it. And I mean, this is pretty much, like I said, I wrote it as I was reading the manga, so it's all like chronological, so you can sort of follow along. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was when Jack and Glenn, or Oswald of the past, when the two of them are conversing about Lacey. And what I started to realize as I was reading this is that for Jack, Lacey is like a narcotic. Lacey is a drug for Jack. He has put so much time and effort into pursuing her and in surviving that he has lost all concept of who he is. And I think that, oddly enough, the realization that he has at the moment where he truly realizes that Lacey brings out him, the true emotions of Jack Vesalius, is when he realizes that he hates her, that he resents the fact that she found him and then just left him, and that hatred and love. I mean, we've talked about this in other videos in this manga about how these things sort of can become intertwined with each other. And for Jack, it is this kind of thing where he never feels like he is actually himself unless he's with Lacey. And whether it be love or whether it be hate or whether it be just a moment of stillness, it is only with her that Jack feels like he is truly living as an individual for his own purposes and has an identity. And of course, identity has been a big thing through this whole thing. Like, you know, that was sort of the big journey that Oz had in terms of coming to accept who he was and accepting that he wasn't just some imitation or that he wasn't a thief living in someone else's body, but that he actually had an existence and that it was justified and defined by the people that he spent time with. And I think that this is kind of like this whole thing about, like, again, like it's that whole relationship of defining yourself through your experiences and your, you know, connections with other people. And in this series, we see that on a wide variety. We see that in Oz, we see that it can improve you, that it can make you stronger, that when you see people who love you and that you love as well, that it can help define you in a way that makes sense and that helps strengthen your resolve. In the case of Jack, we see it as a thing of obsession. We see it as a point of losing yourself so much that you only feel like you're really existing when you're with that person, and what kind of madness and depths that it'll drive you to. So, like, we've got Levi talking to Leo and about what, you know, and Levi's saying to Leo, like, and of course this is all in, I guess, kind of like in Leo's head, about what it is that Leo wants. And this was this whole thing where they come to the realization, or at least, you know, sort of Leo comes to this realization that if he allows the past to be changed, and remember, Leo has been kind of a passive observer in this whole thing. Oswald has really just taken over. And Leo has become very passive, and it's perhaps because he really doesn't know what he wants. And in this, Levi sort of says to him, like, you need to decide, and you really don't have an option of saying what happens if you're not going to participate. And for Leo, he immediately thinks that if the past is changed, that perhaps Elliot can be saved. And this becomes a bit of a turning point, I think, for Leo in this manga, in this volume, where even though he thinks that, he eventually comes to that same realization that Gil was trying to tell Vince, where Gil was saying to Vincent, you know, if you're not my brother, you know, I may still look like Gilbert, I may even still have a name, Gilbert, but I won't be that person anymore because I am only who I am because of my relationship with you. And Leo kind of realizes that in many ways that that's sort of the same between he and Elliot. And that to change the past could be risking changing Elliot into somebody that he wasn't, in sort of, I think it would almost be a betrayal, that whole thing where Elliot, because of who he was, met the end that he did. And to change that, to change the person fundamentally, is a betrayal of that sacrifice, is a betrayal of that honorable and noble end that Elliot met. And it's also to risk undoing all of their relationship altogether. So again, here's where we see sort of this same idea, right? Where we have Jack, who, like, there's so many parallels in this last volume in particular. I mean, they've existed throughout the whole series. We've talked about it in the past, but this volume, they are so highlighted. So here we have same idea, right? We have a character who is sort of alone, is separated, finds himself starting to define himself and find his own sense of self because of his interactions with a person who he loses. And in this case, Leo decides to let him go because he honors the time that they had together, because he honors the fact that Elliot was the person he was because of the world being the way it was. And on the other hand, we have Jack, who can't let go and is willing to destroy and tear down everything because of that obsession and because he's incapable of letting go of Lacey in any way, or in a lot of ways in terms of honoring her memory in any way. He's perverted the whole thing where he thinks he's honoring her or her wishes, but it's very likely that he has just twisted his own desires and sort of put them on her name as an excuse. Another relationship that is about the whole defining of self, and this one, I mean, I don't think I've really picked up on this as much. I mean, it really comes to a head in this volume, but that is the core of the Abyss. And the core of the Abyss and its relationship with the Alices and its relationship with Lacey that sort of started the whole thing. We have Lacey at one point talking to Oswald, and she tells him that the thing that's at the center of the Abyss, it's lonely even though it doesn't know what loneliness is. You know, like, it has fears even though it doesn't even know what fear is. And what's interesting to me then is that because of Lacey's, well, I mean, Levi obviously interfered with this whole thing, but I mean, Lacey's thinking that she is providing companionship to the core. But by doing so, she teaches the core about loneliness, about fear. And because of that now, the core and its interactions with these girls, it now is sentient to its own emotions. And it is afraid, and it doesn't want to be left alone again. And so that's why it is holding on to the white-haired Alice so desperately, to the point where it's destroyed the Abyss. Like, it's perverted the Abyss, and that it even gets to the point where it decides it's going to try and incorporate the Bee-Rabbit Alice to try and, you know, fix things. Again, we're seeing, like, the obsessive side of love in a way. Like, and it's funny that Jack would be so integral to the intention of the Abyss, and it's the intention of the Abyss that has that same sort of poisoned idea of relationships, and where its interactions with someone, instead of fulfilling it and making it stronger, are actually making it more afraid and more insane in a very real way. Another relationship that really we have to talk about in this volume is Oswald and his relationships with Jack and with Lacey. And I think I talked a little bit about, in the last volume, about this sort of really conflicting identity of Oswald. And it really comes to a head in this volume. And I don't think it's really made as clear until Leo finally acts and basically speaks up and says to Oswald, you really don't want to kill Lacey. If anything, you're looking for someone who's strong enough to stop you and find another way. And this, I mean, it explains so much, because you see, we have Oswald the brother to Lacey. We have Oswald the friend to Jack. And then we have Oswald, who now has become Glenn. And it's clear that he has chosen the path of Glenn and the authority and the responsibility of Glenn above and beyond all other things. He sacrificed his sister to the Abyss because he was Glenn. He had all those people killed in Sablier. I mean, even though it was kind of like mercy, but, you know, he did some fairly horrible things because it was his duty as Glenn. And so we have a character who is so conflicted because he feels like he has to follow that path, but at the same time, he is so filled with guilt and with remorse. And in a way, he is looking for someone to stop him. He is looking for someone to intervene, because he doesn't have that strength to say, I don't care about being Glenn. I don't care about those responsibilities. I'm going to let them be and just leave it. And so, of course, he comes into conflict with Oz, and they finally sort of break through, you know, the whole, like, with the intention going absolutely nuts. The whole area where they are, the Sablier falls apart. They fall deeper into the time stream, and they arrive at the point where Oswald initially meant to go, which is where he and Lacey are still young children. They haven't even met the Baskervilles yet. And we see Oswald go to cut Lacey down. And I thought it was kind of interesting that Oz, being there, he at first reaches out to try and make to stop Glenn or stop Oswald, but you can see he falters, and he kind of like decides to let it go and see what happens. And I don't know that I don't know if Oz trusted at that moment what he was seeing, if he felt at that point that, you know, if he had the same sort of gut instincts that Leo did, or what that case may be. And I don't know if he would have tried to intervene if it had become apparent that Oswald really truly meant to carry through with things. But at that point, Oswald has the opportunity to cut Lacey down, to fulfill this plan that he feels he must do as Glenn. And he drops his sword. He can't do it, because it's his sister, and he will not cut her down again. He has dealt with that guilt and lived with that, and he cannot make himself do it again. And I thought that this moment for him, I mean, this kind of leads from that moment where, as they're going through the time stream, at first they hear Lacey's song, they go through the memories of Lacey singing, and then they actually go through the point where Lacey was put into the Abyss, and she looks at Oswald / Glenn / Leo and acknowledges him as her brother and says, I'm sorry. And I think it's kind of interesting that Mochizuki kind of leaves this open-ended. Oswald obviously has his own ideas about why she's apologizing, even though he says she shouldn't. Especially with that smile on her face, but still that sadness in her eyes, that conflicted emotion. He sort of feels that she's apologizing to him in that present form, not the Oswald that was condemning her at that moment to the abyss. That somehow, perhaps because she was a child of ill omen, or who knows, but because of it, that she could see him in that moment, and she was apologizing because perhaps she knew what was about to happen, or somehow figured it out, or had this moment of clairvoyance or clarity, who knows. But she apologizes to him, and of course then he arrives there and he cannot fulfill that. He will not cut her down. And shortly after that, his essence, his spirit, dissolves and disappears. He's pushed himself too hard, too far, and he's burned himself out. And I think that it's kind of poetic that it happens in that moment where he has become Oswald again. Because that, to me, is what happens, is that the moment he refuses to cut down Lacey, he is no longer Glenn. He is Oswald. He is her brother. And in a way, it's almost like his atoning for that guilt, that here he is again faced with the decision of destroying her, and he cannot do it again. So we see this sort of thing with Oswald as well, this whole defining of self and losing yourself. And I mean, he has that guilt that he's like, I should have pushed Jack away, and I should have pushed Jack away when I saw that he was getting crazier with Lacey being gone, or, you know, I should have told Jack what was happening in the very beginning and let him take her away. Like, you see all of these doubts and all these things playing in his mind, and you realize that when it boils down to it, it was all that conflict that he felt he must be Glenn, but that he still wanted to be a friend, and he still wanted to be a brother, but he chose the duty above all of those things. Which, I mean, it opens up to a whole bunch of other conversations about whether this manga is partly about that, about fulfilling duty. I mean, we've certainly seen dukes trying to fulfill certain duties and manipulating things in the name of fulfilling certain duties. Like, it again is this sort of ongoing debate about how much do you give yourself to an idea and how much do you keep for yourself. And it's the same thing with these relationships with people. How much do you define yourself? How much do you give away of yourself? It's that conflict that I think it's been running throughout this whole series. And it's just, like I said, in this volume, I think it was really beautifully just kind of counterbalanced between all of these different characters. So, of course, now Oswald is gone. Leo is in control. He and Oz have this great little moment where they fight with each other and curse out each other, and yet at the same time you can see that there's this genuine like affection for each other. And they're like, how do we get to the abyss now? How do we get down to the deepest levels to get to where the intention is, because the abyss has gone completely nuts along with her. And this is where the whole Incuse thing comes in, and this is where the whole deal that Oz proposed to Jack a couple volumes ago. We knew this was going to come back because it hadn't been answered, but so it was funny because knowing even how Incuses work, the whole idea that the contract is dragged down, that the contract is severed between the chain and the contractor, I didn't really put that together, you know, that in the end that would be their ticket into the abyss, that it would be Oz having used his powers so much that he's intentionally pushed so that his Incuse will finish and that he'll be dragged down into the abyss. And that in the end, his deal with Jack is based on the fact that he knows that he will soon be ejected from the body once their contract is ended. And his deal with Jack is, you know what? You promised Alice, the white Alice, you promised her that you would come for her. I need you to go to her and tell her the truth. in essence, he's like, it's time to man up. You know, you promised a girl that you would see her, so now it's time to stop keeping her waiting, and it's time to come clean and tell her exactly what's actually been going on and exactly what your intentions are. And so our heroes all descend into the abyss, where they find that Alice has been taken in by the intention. Gil has, of course, been sort of fighting to try and stave it off and save himself at the same time. But when they arrive there, so as they arrive, of course, it is now Jack in the body. And I thought it was kind of interesting, that really volatile reaction that the core has to Jack. It's not an immediate thing. It's not immediately where the core and the intention and the white-haired Alice, where they all sort of come out for Jack right away. In fact, quite the opposite. They attack. They do everything they can to force them back. In fact, Vincent and Gil have to use their chains to sort of defend everybody and to clear a path so Jack can try and get through. Sidebar, I loved the little thing where I thought in the last video that when the Duchess Barma or whatever, when Miranda Barma, when she disappeared, I thought that meant that Demios had disappeared. But he uses Demios, Vincent uses Demios in this one, but Gil looks at him and he's like, "Are you okay?" And Vincent says, "It's just power. It does not chain me down to my past anymore." And I love the little like hair rub that Gil gives to Vincent, and like just that happiness that he's seen his brother finally like let go, and you know, this idea that perhaps they can actually get on with living with each other. And so these brothers back to back fighting together. Finally they clear the path for Jack, and Jack goes up, and we see in Jack's thoughts that he has every intention of betraying Oz. That Oz's deal with him was basically that, you know what, if you give it a moment, you're going to find out that your thoughts about Lacey are wrong. That Lacey does not want this world dragged into the abyss. She does not want the abyss to be further corrupted. That she loved all these worlds, and the only way that these worlds can be the way that she loved them is for them to be separate. And Jack's like, whatever, man, like, you know, I'm not going to tell the intention of the abyss the stuff that you want me to tell it. I'm going to tell her that you guys are trying to take me away from her, and that she should just fight against you and not listen to you. But it's interesting because Jack instead finds himself telling the truth. Telling her about the lies, telling her about the manipulation, telling her about his obsession with this one girl. And it's funny because it's interspersed with Jack's thoughts of like, why am I saying these things? And I was kind of looking at it. I mean, okay, and it's easy to be critical and maybe a little bit cynical and say that the reason you're saying these things, Jack, is for story expediency. But at the same time, you could kind of look at this from a couple of different levels. Like, I think that on the one hand, we could say perhaps Jack, he's been so in such close contact with Oz's soul. I mean, they've both cohabitated in this body. We could say that maybe a little bit of Oz has rubbed off on Jack. But I think that, like, what it really boils down to is that Jack, his whole thing with Lacey, his whole obsession with Lacey, is to find his true self. To be true to who he is, and to be able to say the things, be able to say words and hear them and actually go, yes, those are my words. Those are my thoughts. It's not just some mask that I'm putting on. It's not just some show that I'm making for somebody. It is truly what I think. And because he's driven that, and that's been his driving force, and because he's seen Lacey as the sole tool of accomplishing that, I think it's kind of interesting that, like, I think what's happened here is that the floodgates break and that truth comes out. Whether he wants it to or not, at this point, it's like he's facing this final moment, this final chance to actually be Jack Vesalius, not just what everybody else thinks Jack Vesalius should be. And even though it surprises himself, I think it makes sense still. And it's funny because it's at that point where the intention calms down. Because she says that even though what you've said hurts, I feel like I've finally found you. I feel like I finally know you. And that for the first time I'm actually seeing Jack Vesalius. And it's in this calm moment that she turns to Oz and they continue with the next step of their plan, which is for her to make a contract with Oz and for Oz to separate her from the core of the abyss. So, of course, Oz is sort of brought into the intention as he makes the contract with her. And, like, did anybody else feel like it was sort of like a, I don't know, salt in the wound or a tease or whatever, that chapter then opens with Oz at his tea party? And all these characters that we've lost and that we've seen go through all this torture and everything else, that they're all there and they're all happy. And it's so much the ending that I think we want, but at the same time you know that it just can't be true. And they kind of, the Alices pull Oz through and they're like, we thought that maybe you had gotten lost because of what you saw in your heart and stuff when you were going through the core. And he tells them, no, it was just a dream. It was this thing. And white-haired Alice basically says to him, well, it may not have just been a dream. You may have just come in contact with another story. Another way that this story has played out. Another world so close to this one, but yet different. And I'm not sure how to feel about that. Like, to me, I thought that was kind of bittersweet, right? I mean, it's nice to think that, oh, well, the characters that we love that are gone are still alive somewhere else. But it doesn't change the fact that the characters we have followed on this journey from the start have suffered those losses and aren't going to be able to get those people back. So I don't know. Like, again, it's almost like a tease. It's almost, to me, I don't know. I kind of thought like that's almost a little mean-spirited, like not mean-spirited, I guess, but you know what I'm saying? That when you look at that, you're like, well, I don't know if she's throwing us a bone, trying to say, oh, don't feel too bad that I've killed all these people because somewhere they're alive and happy, or whether it's kind of like just one more little, let's put some vinegar in that salt with the wounds and just kind of like dig a little deeper because, yeah, take a look at what our characters could have had, but they don't get to have. I don't know. I mean, I guess in a sense, though, you could look at it that bitter way, but I think the other part of it is that it's, again, that reinforcement of Oz, right? It's that reinforcement of Oz's personality. It's that reinforcement that even in another time and place, he's still touched those lives and those lives have still touched him. It's kind of like an affirmation that, if things could have gone just a little bit differently, none of that was a lie. It was all true. All those feelings, all those desires, all those friendships, they were real. So, in a way, I guess maybe it helps to help sort of shore him up, because he knows, and I mean, I didn't quite realize it at the time. I guess I should have, again, like, it's kind of stupid of me not to realize it, but he knows that the second that he ends her, the second that a chain turns on its contractor, that it's going to be the end of him. And that because the two Alices are so intertwined, it's going to be the end of his Alice as well. They know that they're sacrificing themselves, but they do it anyway. And, like, guys, oh my God, like, did anybody else get all, like, kind of choked up with the whole Cheshire Cat thing? Like, damn, really? Like, because Cheshire earlier was like, oh, when I saw her, she just ignored me, and I don't think she loves me anymore, or that I think she's unhappy with me, and yet here he is, and she's got tears, and she's so happy to see him, and she's like, I know you've always been there protecting me, and he turns back into like a little kitty cat. I I was like, grr, and then she's like, just stay with me and come with me as we go to the next tale, and he gives a little meow, and then they shatter into light. I was just like, oh my god, like, wow, man. I don't know, like that moment I think got me like probably more than a lot of others. Like, yeah, again, it's that whole thing of like, here was a character that was so devoted to his Alice and had lived his whole existence for her, and even though he felt that she didn't want him anymore or wasn't as, enamored with him anymore, he was still devoted to her, and in the end, he gets his due. He gets that recognition. He gets that love. He gets to continue on whatever future journey there is along with her. It was just, I thought it was a really beautiful little moment. I got a little choked up by that one, yeah. But, yeah. Sorry. So, okay, so let's move on. Move on from the weepy bits. So, of course, now the core is alone. It is fully able to exert its power, and it does so to heal the chains of the world, to shore it all up, to seal all the breaches, and the abyss becomes what it used to be, a place of golden dancing lights. And Jack is forced to admit to Oz that, you know what, you were right. I see it. I see now the world that Lacey saw, and you're right. She never would have wanted me to destroy this. Like, she never would have wanted either of those worlds to become tarnished in the way that they did. And like that, and then, yeah, like, we have that whole, thing where the world is healing, and then we find out that Duke Barma's not dead. I was like, yeah, one of our characters didn't die. And he even comes in, like, as a hero and saving Cheryl from, like, a chain, and then immediately we go into Oz and Alice's goodbye speech, and their goodbye embrace with Gil, and like, seriously, man, this volume was just, it was brutal, and so then Oz and Alice, they're basically like, we're only staying long enough because the core is giving us a little bit of power. We're gonna go. We'll join with the 100-year cycle. And Gil, like, calls out to them. He's like, I'm a Baskerville. I will live a lot longer than normal human beings, and I will wait for you. I will find you again. And so instead of saying goodbye, they say, see you later, and they disappear. And then we sort of go into the coda of the story, and, we get a little bit of updates. So Rhyme and Sharon end up getting married. Sharon ends up aging again, and I'm not sure if it was Lily with them or if they had a child. Maybe it was both. I'm not too sure, but they get married. Cheryl and Duke Barma don't get married, but they do stay together until Duke Barma passes away. Vince convinces Gil to tell her that he died because, and it's a bit bittersweet and altruistic, right? Like, you see that Vincent really did care about her, because you see there's that one panel where he's checking up on her to see what her life is like. But at the same time, he lets her go because he's like, I am a Baskerville. I'll outlive her, like, she's going to age and die and I won't. And that's no life for her to have. So when we see that Ada, it looks like she does end up getting married. We find out that the Dukes have been stripped of their powers. Pandora's been effectively, taken care of. It's done away with. And the Baskervilles, even Leo is like, you know what? We should change our relationship with the core. It now knows what it is to be lonely, so we should be its friends. We shouldn't just, be its caretakers. We should be its friends and visit it. And he says to Vincent, he says, children of ill omen will no longer be a curse. That, if anything, you're the blessing. You are the bridge that can get us closer to the core and can keep that relationship going. You are the way that we are going to be able to maintain that relationship. And Jack, his soul is burning out, and he says, well, you can use my body if you want to give the core like a corporeal existence again. It's a lot stronger because of being with Oz and everything else. And I don't know, they don't actually say whether they decide to go ahead with it or not. You can see Leo's somewhat contemplating, but at the same time it scares the bejesus out of him. He's kind of like, do I want to open that door? You know what I mean? And you can't blame the guy. You can't blame the guy for being a little bit suspicious of what Jack's motives are. So we have sort of this, and and it's Gil that's sort of narrating the whole thing, and Gil says, all these years have gone by, and I've watched a lot of friends pass along. And then we find Gil, and he's in the garden with the cross, where the cemetery. I guess it's Lacey's grave, or it's the grave that they made for Lacey. I think, yeah, it is. That's so many volumes ago now, but it's funny that that's kind of where this whole thing starts, and now, of course, Mochizuki and her perfect symmetry ends it here. So Gil is there, and Vincent comes in, and we discover it's been 4 years since they've even spoken to each other, and Vincent says, I've been doing what you asked me to do, and then he says, but, I didn't just do it for you, I did it for myself as well. And I kind of got that impression that, let's get to what happens, and then I can tell you why I kind of got that impression. That Vincent says he knows his body can't hold on any longer, and that, this is the end, and he and Gil have this really nice sentiment about, how they were so glad that they could be brothers and be together, and then Vincent reduces to dust, which, again, it's that symmetry, right? Because almost immediately afterwards, a young boy and a young girl run in, and it's Oz and Alice. And they say that even though they haven't regained all their memories, there's still enough there that Oz has a tear running down, and he's like, it's good to see you again, Gil. And the book ends with this embrace of the three of them, and then, segues out as we look at the grave again, this catalyst that basically set all of this off. And in a way, I like knowing that this is how it ends. I kind of wonder if Vincent knew that he was going to be, that he knew he was on borrowed time. And when he says he was doing it for himself, he knew that Gil losing another person and being alone probably wasn't good for Gil. And that if he could push himself harder and further and find Alice and Oz, that it would be like that, passing of the torch, that where one story ended, this brand new story begins. And I kind of wondered as I was reading it, I'm like, I wonder if Gil is Glenn now. I wonder if he's the head of the Baskervilles at this point. I recall them saying something that the Glens don't last as long once they become Glenn, because of their, how much energy they have with the Abyss, or I can't recall exactly, but I seem to think that. So, it is possible that even though Leo is a bit younger than Gil, it's possible that Leo has passed on at some point, and now Gil is Glenn, and who knows how much longer he has. He tells Vincent that, I may be following you shortly, and Vincent's like, no, you can't. And we don't really realize why he's saying Gil can't until, of course, the kids run in. And I found myself looking at that going, if Gil is the head of the Baskervilles, I wonder if this means now that this new Oz, this reincarnation of Oz, is going to be his valet. and that eventually he would become Glenn. And again, we talk about these cycles and this symmetry in this series. It, you know, and that whole thing where it starts off with Gil is his valet, and now he could be potentially Gil's valet, and it's the cycle, right? And it's that new story, even though we have similar players. I'd be really interested in reading that, Mochizuki, if, you know, you ever have a chance to watch this video for some bizarre reason. I would read the hell out of the series of what happens with Oz and Alice and Gil from this point. So, that's the end of Pandora Hearts. 24 volumes, 24 videos. Mochizuki says in the afterword it took her 9 years to do the manga, which, wow, you know, 9 years to one project, but there are mangakas who have done series for a lot longer, so I guess it's not all that crazy, but nonetheless, phenomenal series. You know what, like, I think this is probably my favorite manga that I have ever read. It just has such great themes and good characters, and just the way that the story is told and the levels of symmetry and foreshadowing and everything else that are used so flawlessly. It's a great story. I'm really glad that I picked up that volume 1 just to do a volume 1 review, and then everybody in the comments was like, you need to read the rest of this, and I'm glad I listened. So now that this series is over, what am I going to do next? Well, I had asked you for some ideas, and, you know, I had some ideas. Well, I finished just recently the 3rd volume of the Seraph of the End prequel series, Guren Ichinose Catastrophe at 16. And really like those characters, really like that story, so I've decided to go ahead and I'm going to continue this series doing Seraph of the End, the manga. One of the other considerations was that I can get them in digital copies, which are a lot cheaper. Some of the titles you guys suggested sounded great, but I could only get them in physical copies, which are at least double the price or more of buying them digitally. So I'm kind of on a budget, so that was kind of part of the idea that played out there. Plus, like I said, I want to read the series after reading these light novels. I'm probably not going to start those until maybe in the new year. You know, we got Christmas and a lot of other expenses going on, so I probably won't do it until then. I have a couple of volume 1s of mangas that I want to review that I bought some time ago and just never got to. And I think what I will do going forward is I'm going to try and do one of these in-depths on Seraph of the End every other week, and the week in between do just like a general, you know, 5 to 10 minute volume number 1 review like I've done in the past. So those are the plans going forward. Thank you so much for watching these videos. 24 video long series, and I know a lot of you have watched every single one. I really appreciate you coming along on the journey. Thank you for your comments over the time that I've been doing this series. Really have enjoyed reading your thoughts and interacting with you. So that's the end. Thank you so much for watching the video. I hope you'll join me for Seraph of the End and my other manga reviews. And don't forget, you know, I do review light novels as well, and those are a heck of a lot of fun, so you can check out those videos as well. So thanks again. I will see you in the next video. Till then, bye-bye for now.